Among history's most remarkable figures, Xenia Alexandrovna was born on the 6th of April in 1875 in the Grand Anichkov Palace, located in Saint Petersburg, part of the Russian Empire. A renowned royal figure who lived through both great privilege and painful loss. Her life offers a rare look into the final days of Imperial Russia. What does it mean to grow up in a palace yet fear for your safety each day? How does it feel when your powerful family begins to lose everything? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now let us dive into the full story. Xenia was the daughter of Alexander III, who would later become Emperor of Russia, and Maria Feodorovna, born Dagmar of Denmark, as the fourth child and elder daughter. She belonged to one of Europe's most powerful dynasties, the Romanovs. When Xenia was just 5 years old, her grandfather, Emperor Alexander II, was assassinated in a brutal attack. Her father, fearing more violence, moved the family from the busy Winter Palace to the quieter Gachina Palace, far from city unrest. At Gachina, Xenia's early life was both privileged and strict. She and her siblings had simple rooms and lived by a set routine. They woke early, slept on hard beds, and bathed in cold water. She was educated by private tutors and learned several languages, including English, French, and German. Outside of her studies, Xenia enjoyed arts, music, and horseback riding. Her childhood was one of discipline mixed with charm, filled with royal traditions, but shadowed by the dangers of the time. Xenia Alexandrovna grew up in a royal world shaped by tradition and duty. While her life was surrounded by luxury, her upbringing focused on values like discipline, family loyalty, and responsibility. Her parents, Alexander III and Maria Feodorovna, wanted their children to grow up strong, educated, and ready to serve the empire. So, even though she was a Grand Duchess, Xenia's daily life was carefully structured and quite modest compared to what people might imagine. Private tutors came to teach her every day. She learned to speak and write in several languages, including English, French, and German. Her lessons also included history, geography, and science. But education was not just about books. Xenia was trained in skills expected of royal women at the time: cooking, embroidery, sewing, and managing a household. She also learned woodworking and puppet making, both of which she enjoyed very much. As part of their tradition, the Romanov children spent summers at Fredensborg Castle in Denmark, the home of their Danish grandparents. These visits were not just vacations. They were a way to stay connected to their extended royal family across Europe. It was during one of these trips that Xenia formed a deep friendship with her cousin Princess Marie of Greece. Xenia's family traditions also included regular church services, formal dinners, and holiday celebrations, with customs passed down through generations. Life in the palace followed strict rules, but there was warmth and affection among the siblings. These early traditions shaped Xenia's personality: strong, thoughtful, and graceful under pressure. She learned early that being royal meant more than having a title. It meant showing dignity, compassion, and a deep sense of duty in everything she did. From a young age, Xenia Alexandrovna shared a special bond with her cousin, Grand Duke Alexander Mikhailovich. Known within the family as Sandro, he was the son of her father's uncle, making him part of the Romanov dynasty. When they were children, they played together during family gatherings, and over time, their friendship blossomed into something more. Xenia's feelings for Alexander grew stronger as she entered her teenage years. At just 15, she wished to marry him. But her parents believed she was still too young, and her mother had concerns about Alexander's attitude and behavior. Despite her parents' doubts, the young couple stayed close. In letters and small gifts, they kept their affection alive. Eventually, with support from Alexander's father, the engagement was approved on the 12th of January in 1894. Their wedding took place later that year, on the 6th of August, in the chapel of the Peterhof Palace. Xenia was 19 years old. The ceremony was joyful, filled with family and tradition. Her sister Olga recalled how happy their father was during the celebration. It was one of the last times he smiled that brightly before his passing. After the wedding, the newlyweds spent their honeymoon at I Todor, Alexander's estate in Crimea. Sadly, only a few months later, Xenia's father, Emperor Alexander III, fell ill and died on the 1st of November in 1894. His death marked the beginning of a new chapter for Xenia, both personally and politically. Her older brother Nicholas now became the new Emperor of Russia, and Xenia stepped into her role as a prominent figure in the imperial family, wife, mother-to-be, and sister to the new ruler of the empire. As a Grand Duchess, Xenia Alexandrovna took her social duties seriously. From a young age, she believed that being a member of the royal family came with the responsibility to help others. Unlike some royals who stayed distant from the public, Xenia became deeply involved in charity work, showing real care for people in need. Her compassion made her stand out during a time when many struggled with poverty and illness across the Russian Empire. Xenia supported many organizations, but one of her earliest roles was with the Women's Patriotic Association. She helped women whose husbands were serving in the military. In 1903, she became the patron of the CRC Society of Saint Petersburg. This group looked after young children while their parents worked long hours in factories. She also supported hospitals in Crimea that cared for patients with tuberculosis, a disease that had once affected her brother George. In addition to these efforts, she became the patron of the Maritime Naval Welfare Association, which gave help to widows and children of sailors who had died in service. She also founded the Xenia Association for the Welfare of Children of Workers and Airmen, showing her forward-thinking attitude in helping families involved in modern jobs. Xenia did not just give money, she gave her time and attention. She often visited schools and hospitals and listened to the concerns of nurses and teachers. One of her proudest achievements was supporting the Kasyninsky Institute, a boarding school for girls in Saint Petersburg. With room for 350 students, it gave education and opportunity to those who needed it most. Through her efforts, Xenia proved that royalty could also be a force for kindness, hope, and change. In the early 1900s, Russia faced major unrest, and Xenia Alexandrovna found herself watching her country struggle through both war and revolution. On the 25th of January in 1904, she wrote in her diary that Russia had declared war on Japan. She had hoped this conflict would never happen. Months earlier, she had spoken to the war minister, asking if war could be avoided. But events quickly moved beyond anyone's control. As the war unfolded, things got worse for the people of Russia. On a cold Sunday in January 1905, a peaceful group of workers, led by Father Gipon, marched toward the Winter Palace in Saint Petersburg. They wanted to give a petition to the emperor, asking for better working conditions and food. But instead of being heard, they were met by soldiers who opened fire. Over 100 people were killed. This tragic day became known as Bloody Sunday, and it shook the nation deeply. Xenia was horrified by what happened. That same year, her uncle Sergei was killed by a bomb in Moscow. She wanted to comfort her aunt, but it was too dangerous to travel. She also heard about Russia's defeat in Korea and expressed deep disappointment in her diary over how the war had been handled. When the sailors of the Black Sea Fleet rebelled, it became clear that the Russian Empire was changing fast. By the end of the year, her brother, Emperor Nicholas II, was forced to accept a Duma, a government assembly, something many in the family feared was the end of royal power. Through it all, Xenia tried to remain hopeful. But the cracks in the empire were becoming too deep to ignore. As tensions grew in Russia, so did problems within the Romanov family. Xenia Alexandrovna remained close to her brother, Emperor Nicholas II, and she watched with concern as strange influences began to take hold in the palace. The most troubling of these was a man named Grigory Rasputin, known as a wandering holy man. Rasputin claimed he could heal the emperor's only son, Alexei, who suffered from a serious bleeding illness called hemophilia. At first, Rasputin's presence seemed helpful, but soon his control over the empress, Alexandra, began to grow. The empress believed Rasputin was the only one who could save her son. She trusted him so much that she allowed him to influence government decisions. Many members of the royal family, including Xenia, were shocked and worried. They felt that Rasputin's power was dangerous and could hurt the family's reputation. Xenia was not alone in her fears. Her mother, the Dowager Empress Maria, and her sister Olga also worried about Rasputin's growing influence. In letters and conversations, they begged Emperor Nicholas to remove him, but their words went unheard. Eventually, in late 1916, Rasputin was murdered. Xenia was embarrassed by the scandal, especially since her own son-in-law, Felix Yusupov, was one of the men involved in the killing. Family life had become strained. Xenia rarely saw the empress, and even though she loved her brother deeply, she was losing faith in the choices he made. With the empire already facing rebellion and war, the chaos inside the royal court only added to the problems. For Xenia, these moments marked the beginning of the end, not just for the Romanovs, but for the world she had always known. When World War I broke out in the summer of 1914, Xenia Alexandrovna was in France, while her mother, the Dowager Empress Maria, was in London. They quickly traveled to Russia, hoping to support the country during a time of growing fear and uncertainty. Once home, Xenia threw herself into helping the wounded. She created her own hospital train, opened a hospital for injured soldiers, and chaired the Xenia Institute, which provided artificial limbs for those who had lost arms or legs in battle. But despite her efforts, the situation across the empire kept getting worse. In 1915, Emperor Nicholas II decided to take personal command of the army. Xenia and her mother were deeply worried and traveled to Tsarskoye Selo to try and stop him. They believed he was not prepared for such a serious role. He did not listen. As the war dragged on and more soldiers died, the people grew angry and the empire started to crumble. By early 1917, the streets of Saint Petersburg were filled with unrest. Factories stopped working, food was scarce, and crowds demanded change. On the 25th of February, Xenia wrote in her diary about strikes, shootings, and hunger in the city. Just days later, news spread that her brother's train had been stopped and that he had been forced to step down from power. Xenia was heartbroken. She tried to see her brother, but the new government denied her. Realizing her own safety was at risk, she left for Crimea on her birthday, the 6th of April. It was the start of her long journey away from the empire she loved and the royal life she once knew. In the spring of 1917, Xenia Alexandrovna joined her mother, husband, and sister at their family estate I Todor, Crimea. Life there was tense. Although far from the riots of Saint Petersburg, the Red Army was growing stronger and coming closer every day. News soon reached them of terrible tragedies. Her brother, Emperor Nicholas II, along with his wife and children, had been murdered by the Bolsheviks. Her other brother, Grand Duke Michael, had been killed just weeks earlier. These deaths left Xenia in deep sorrow. By April of 1919, the situation was too dangerous to remain. Thanks to the help of Queen Alexandra of the United Kingdom, who was Xenia's aunt, and King George V, her first cousin, a British warship, the HMS Marlborough, was sent to rescue them. On the 11th of April, Xenia, her mother, 5 of her sons, and other Romanov relatives escaped from Russia. They traveled through the Black Sea to Malta, and finally to England. Xenia never returned to her homeland. Life in exile was very different from the grandeur she once knew. At first, she stayed with her mother and sister Olga. Later, her mother moved to Denmark, while Xenia remained in the United Kingdom. In a strange new world, she tried to rebuild her life. She faced many challenges, including the grief of losing her family and the burden of starting over in a foreign land. Still, she stayed strong for her children, helping them adjust to a life outside of the empire. Xenia had lost her crown, her home, and her world, but not her spirit. In exile, she carried the dignity and memory of the Romanov dynasty with grace and quiet strength. Life in the United Kingdom was safe, but it was far from easy for Xenia Alexandrovna. The Romanovs had lost almost everything after fleeing Russia. Her husband, Alexander, often called Sandro, lived in Paris for many years, and their relationship had grown distant. Xenia was left to care for her children while managing their new life with very little money. By the mid-1920s, her finances had reached a breaking point. In this time of need, her cousin, King George V of the United Kingdom, stepped in. He allowed Xenia to live in Frogmore Cottage, a grace and favor residence located near Windsor Castle. This meant that she could live there rent-free, a small mercy that brought her some peace of mind. Although the house was much simpler than the palaces she had once known, it gave her a roof over her head and a place to raise her children. Xenia also had to deal with false claims from a woman named Anna Anderson, who said she was Anastasia, one of the emperor's murdered daughters. The case caused public drama and drew unwanted attention. Xenia strongly rejected the claim, especially since the real family had never believed Anastasia had survived. The situation added stress to her already difficult life. Despite her troubles, Xenia never complained. She stayed quiet, loyal, and proud. She spent her days managing her household and supporting her remaining family. With help from King George and the small sale of her mother's estate and jewels, she managed to survive. Through these challenges, she showed that strength is not always loud. It can be quiet, steady, and full of grace. As the years passed, Xenia Alexandrovna faced a mix of family joys and painful scandals. Her only daughter, Irina, married Prince Felix Yusupov in 1914. Felix was one of the wealthiest men in Russia and later became known for his role in the murder of Rasputin. Xenia had not fully approved of the marriage at first, due to Felix's reputation. But the wedding still went ahead with the support of the royal family, including the emperor. In the late 1920s, her mother, the Dowager Empress Maria, became ill and passed away on the 13th of October in 1928. It was a deep loss for Xenia, who had remained close to her throughout their lives. The sale of her mother's estate and jewelry helped bring in some income, but the sadness lingered. Not long after, a man named Gleb Botkin accused Xenia of trying to steal from Anna Anderson, the woman falsely claiming to be Anastasia. The scandal once again brought her name into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Then, in 1933, her husband Sandro died. Though they had lived apart for some time, Xenia and her sons attended his funeral in Roquebrune-Cap-Martin in the south of France. After his death, she moved from Frogmore Cottage to Wilderness House on the grounds of Hampton Court Palace. There, she lived more quietly, away from public attention. Even in her final years, Xenia carried the weight of her family's tragic fall and the strange rumors that continued to surround them. She had once been a Grand Duchess of the Russian Empire, but by now she was simply a mother, a widow, and a survivor of a vanished world. Throughout her life, Xenia Alexandrovna was known for her strong family bonds. She stayed close to her brother Nicholas, even when their lives began to drift apart due to politics and war. In the early days before he became emperor, they had a warm relationship. Xenia often spent time with him and his wife, Alexandra, at the Alexander Palace. But over time, the closeness faded. Tensions grew, especially after Alexandra gave birth to several daughters before having a son who was seriously ill. Meanwhile, Xenia had 6 strong, healthy sons. This difference created quiet jealousy and strain between the sisters-in-law. Xenia also loved her other brothers, George and Michael. George's death from illness and Michael's secret marriage and later exile were emotional events for her. Despite their problems, she supported Michael and welcomed him and his wife during visits in Europe. She even tried to speak to Nicholas about letting Michael return to Russia. Though not always successful, Xenia's efforts showed her loyalty to her siblings. She passed on that loyalty to her children. Xenia and her husband had 7 children, 1 daughter, and 6 sons. They were raised with a strong sense of duty, but after the fall of the empire, none of them held royal titles in the traditional way. Because they married outside of royal rules, they were considered ineligible for dynastic leadership under the old Russian laws. Still, through her children and their descendants, Xenia's legacy continued. They became the closest living Romanov relatives of Emperor Nicholas II and carried forward the family history in exile. While the throne was gone, the story of their bloodline lived on thanks in large part to the strength and resilience of Xenia Alexandrovna. Xenia Alexandrovna lived a long and extraordinary life. After losing her country, her title, and many members of her family, she spent her later years quietly in the United Kingdom. In 1937, she moved to Wilderness House on the grounds of Hampton Court Palace, a royal residence offered by the British Crown. There, surrounded by memories of a past she could never return to, she spent her final years in peace. On the 20th of April in 1960, Xenia passed away at the age of 85. Her death marked the end of a life that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, 2 world wars, and the complete collapse of the Russian monarchy. She was buried in the Comité Rue de Roquebrune Cap Martin in France, alongside her husband Sandro. Though she had left Russia forever, her memory remained tied to its history. Xenia's legacy lived on not just in books and stories, but through her children and grandchildren. Many of her personal papers, photographs, and letters were later kept in historical archives, offering future generations a glimpse into the private world of the Romanovs. Her writings showed her deep love for her family and her painful understanding of the changes that destroyed their world. Though she was born a Grand Duchess, Xenia's true greatness was shown through her endurance. She lived with dignity, grace, and quiet strength through some of the most tragic events in modern history. Her life reminds us that even in times of loss and change, one can still carry forward honor, hope, and memory. Thank you very much for watching.